Shalom. Thanks for joining me. I'm in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm going to pick up in verse 38. Now, the main point of the entire Sermon on the Mount comes from the statement that Jesus made in Matthew 5, verse 20, where he said, "Your righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees." Now, the scribes and the Pharisees were considered the most righteous people, and Jesus said, "Your righteousness has to go even beyond them." Now, their righteousness was about conformity to rules and regulations. It was an external conformity. They looked good on the outside. Jesus is saying your righteousness has to conform to God's will in your heart, not just in the external behaviors. Because if it's in your heart, your external behaviors will take care of themselves. You can do good deeds and still be a bad person. Keep because of your character. And so here's what Jesus is saying in verse 38. This is an interesting teaching in here. Now remember, it starts with a passage where Jesus is saying, "You have heard it said, but here's what I say." What Jesus is doing is reinterpreting or reapplying the law, the Torah, the law of Moses, from the way the Pharisees were teaching it, which was external conformity to rules, to the way it was meant to be, which is internal conformity in your heart. And so here it says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, well, hand over your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." An interesting passage. This is the passage about revenge and about, inflicting revenge and getting vengeance upon those who have hurt you. And now this comes from the Old Testament, all right, in the law, where it says that you are to, and it comes from both Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, where the punishment should fit the crime. So if the crime was such that you got blinded in your right eye, then the person who blinded you will be blinded in their right eye as well. If they broke your arm, then their arm gets broken as well. This is what this law is about, and it's the law of restitution. It's a law of controlling vengeance is what it's supposed to do. But here's what Jesus says. I want to go beyond that. I want to go beyond vengeance. I want to go beyond making people pay. I want you to consider something that is extremely difficult. And look what he says in verse 39. Do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek, and so on down the line. Do not resist an evil person. You think that's pretty hard? Absolutely. Could terrible things happen to you if you didn't resist an evil person? Absolutely. What do you think happened to Jesus when he was betrayed in the garden by one of his own Talmudim, one of his own apprentices, one of his own disciples? When he was taken to the high priest's house, and when he was given a kangaroo court, and then they beat him, and they spit on him, and they mocked him, and then they sent him to Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate had him flogged, and then had him crucified. And while he was crucified, quite wrongly, I might add, because he had never done any legal crime worthy of the death penalty, but even while he was dying unjustly, he cried out and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." We are told in Scripture that Jesus died, the just for the unjust. He who knew no sin became our sin for us. And Peter even writes and says that when Jesus was cursed, he didn't curse back. Instead, he blessed. And he said that is how we are to live. Peter said that's the way you and I are supposed to live. We are to bless instead of curse. Do you think that would be hard? Why? Do you think Jesus said your righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. So you may have to think on this a while. You may have to meditate on this a while, because this is not an easy passage to hear, not an easy passage to live out. But this is what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount.